Hell's Angels biker helped little girl escape from a gang. But what he uncovered will break your heart. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Jake Reaper Morrison, a member of the notorious Hell's Angels, was used to living on the edge. The roads he traveled were filled with danger, and the life he led was nothing short of unpredictable. But nothing could prepare him for the night he would meet Emily. It was a cold winter night when Jake was cruising down a desolate highway. The wind howled against his leather jacket as he gripped the handlebars of his motorcycle, his eyes scanning the empty road ahead. His mind was elsewhere, lost in the familiar rhythm of the engine and the road beneath him. That's when he heard it. A faint cry. It was almost inaudible, but it pierced through the night like a beacon. His instincts kicked in immediately, and he turned his bike toward the sound, following the desperate pleas for help. As he approached the sound, the sight before him froze him in place. There, lying on the side of the road, was a little girl, barely 8 years old, her clothes torn and her face bruised. She looked like she had been through a hell of her own. Her eyes, wide with fear, locked onto Jake as he dismounted from his bike. She was shaking, her small body struggling to even sit up. Jake's heart sank. He'd seen violence in his years with the Hell's Angels, but this was different. She was alone, and she was scared. "Please, don't hurt me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jake knelt down, trying to offer her a reassuring smile. But the image of her, so small and vulnerable, made him ache inside. He reached out slowly, careful not to startle her, and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, his voice surprisingly calm. He had to get her out of here, but the girl didn't seem to trust him. She flinched as he moved, her body trying to pull away from his touch. Jake's rough exterior, built from years of living on the edge, suddenly felt out of place. This wasn't the usual scene. This wasn't the kind of encounter he was used to. As he lifted her carefully into his arms, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of responsibility. This little girl was in trouble, and he was the one who found her. It didn't matter that he was a biker, a man with a reputation for toughness. He was her only chance. She was still shaking in his arms, her small body too weak to resist. But when he whispered, "I'll take care of you," something in her softened. She finally let go of the fear, even if just for a moment. As Jake placed her on the back of his motorcycle, his mind raced. He had to figure out who did this to her and why. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was what he was about to uncover. The girl, Emily, wasn't just another victim. She was connected to something much bigger, something that would break his heart and force him to confront his own past. As Jake sped down the road, Emily's fragile form clutched tightly to him, her small arms wrapped around his waist. Jake's mind was swirling with questions. Who had hurt this girl? What kind of life had she been forced to endure? He wasn't sure he could get the answers, but he was certain of one thing. He couldn't let her go. The motorcycle roared to life under the weight of both of them, and Jake focused on the road ahead, every instinct telling him to keep her safe, to keep moving. The cold wind cut through his leather jacket, but the warmth of Emily's small body against his back kept him grounded, reminded him of the importance of what he was doing. She was quiet now, her earlier trembling subsiding, and Jake couldn't help but feel a strange sense of protectiveness. It had been a long time since he'd felt anything close to tenderness. His life had been a series of hard roads, filled with scars from battles both on and off the streets. But this little girl, she made him feel something different, something that he had long buried. As they pulled into the quiet town, Jake took a deep breath. He wasn't used to doing the right thing, but for Emily, he was willing to try. He didn't want to admit it, but he was starting to care about her, and that scared him. He parked the bike outside a small, rundown motel, far from the main strip of town. It wasn't much, but it would be a safe place for now. As Jake helped Emily off the bike, she hesitated, looking up at him with uncertainty in her eyes. She still didn't fully trust him, but there was a flicker of something else there. Maybe hope, maybe relief. "We're safe here for now," Jake said softly, doing his best to reassure her. He helped her inside the room. careful not to make her feel overwhelmed. The room was small and simple, just a bed, a desk, and a single lamp. Jake didn't expect it to feel like home, but for the night, it would have to do. He pulled a blanket from the bed and wrapped it around Emily, who was still shivering. Her eyes were focused on the floor, her fingers fidgeting with the edges of the blanket. Jake's mind wandered as he watched her. He knew she was running from something, but what? Who had hurt her and why? He wasn't used to seeing kids in this kind of situation. It hit him harder than he expected. He had grown up in a rough world. But Emily, she wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be in school, playing with her friends, laughing, and dreaming of the future, not hiding from a past that seemed to have broken her. He sat across from her, giving her space to breathe. She still hadn't said much, but Jake could feel her fear. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to," Jake said gently, his voice rough but kind. "But when you're ready, I'll listen." Emily finally looked up at him, her eyes still full of wariness but also something else, a recognition that Jake wasn't going to hurt her. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jake paused, not sure how to answer. The truth was, he didn't know why he was helping her. He didn't know anyone anything, especially not a little girl who was clearly in trouble. But something about her, about the way she looked at him, made him feel like he couldn't just walk away. "Because you need help," Jake said finally, his words simple but sincere. "And I'm not going to let you down." Emily didn't say anything more. She just nodded, her eyes slowly closing as the exhaustion of the day caught up with her. Jake watched her for a moment, then stood up to check the room, making sure it was secure. As he moved about, his thoughts drifted back to his own past. He wasn't a good man. He knew that. He had done things, bad things, things that couldn't be undone. But helping Emily felt different. It felt right. And for the first time in a long time, Jake wasn't sure where this path was leading him, but he knew he couldn't turn back. There was something in his heart that had been awakened, something he thought he had buried long ago. And now, it was fighting to come to the surface. He couldn't let Emily go back to whatever life she had left behind. He had to protect her, even if it meant facing his own demons. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something deeper, about redemption, about making things right. And as Jake stood there in the quiet motel room, watching over the little girl who had somehow found her way into his heart, he realized that this was the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. The night passed slowly, the quiet only broken by the occasional creak of the old motel building. Jake had stayed awake, sitting in the worn chair by the window, watching over Emily as she slept. The girl had fallen into a deep, exhausted slumber, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was more to her story than she was letting on, and he needed to figure it out. As the first rays of sunlight peeked through the curtains, Jake stood up and stretched, his muscles stiff from sitting for so long. He walked over to Emily, still curled up under the blankets, and gently shook her shoulder. "Hey kid," he said softly. "You need to wake up." Emily stirred, blinking sleepily before she sat up, rubbing her eyes. She looked up at Jake, her face still showing signs of fear and uncertainty. "Are you okay?" Jake asked, his voice low but filled with concern. Emily nodded slowly, but Jake could tell she wasn't entirely okay. "I'm fine," she whispered, but her eyes avoided his. Jake didn't press her. He had learned long ago that sometimes people, especially kids, didn't want to talk about their pain right away. But he also knew that Emily couldn't keep hiding from whatever had happened to her. "We're going to get you some food," Jake said, trying to keep his tone light. "After that, we'll figure out what to do next." He didn't know what the next step was, but he couldn't leave her stranded. He had to help her, even if it meant putting his own life on the line. They left the motel and found a small diner down the road. The smell of coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air as they stepped inside. Jake ordered a simple breakfast, while Emily quietly nibbled at her food, her eyes still distant. As they ate, Jake couldn't help but think about the situation. Emily had been on the run for days, possibly weeks. But why? What had happened to her? And why had she ended up in his path? He knew he couldn't leave her like this. He needed answers. After they finished their meal, Jake took Emily back to the bike. The morning air was cool, and the sun was still low in the sky. As they rode, Jake felt the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. He wasn't used to taking care of anyone, especially not a child. But there was something about Emily that made him want to protect her, something that felt different from everything he had experienced before. They stopped at a small gas station to fill up the bike, and that's when Emily spoke up. I need to tell you something, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake looked down at her, his heart skipping a beat. He had been waiting for this moment, hoping that she would finally open up to him. What is it? He asked gently. Emily hesitated, then looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and sadness. I'm running away from someone. My dad. Jake felt a lump form in his throat. He had known that Emily had been hiding something, but he hadn't expected this. Your dad? He repeated, his voice thick with emotion. Why are you running from him? Emily's hands gripped the sides of the bike as she spoke. He hurt me, she whispered, her voice trembling. I couldn't take it anymore. So I ran. Jake's blood ran cold. He had seen enough in his life to recognize the pain in her eyes. He had lived through his own share of torment. But this was different. This was a child, a little girl who was supposed to be safe. He wanted to rage, to go after whoever had hurt her, but he knew that wasn't the solution. He had to stay focused, to make sure she was safe. You're safe now, Emily, Jake said softly. I won't let anyone hurt you again. Not as long as I'm here. Emily nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Jake didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let this little girl face it alone. As they rode on, the wind whipping past them, Jake made a vow to himself. He would protect Emily, no matter what. He didn't know where the road would take them, but he was ready to fight for her. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about him, too. About finding redemption in a world that had taken so much from him. As they rode into the horizon, Jake couldn't help but wonder what other secrets Emily was hiding. But for now, all that mattered was getting her to safety. He would figure out the rest later. I woke up to the sound of rain tapping lightly on the motel window. The sky was still dark, and the streets outside were empty, save for the occasional car passing by. I stretched my arms and rubbed my eyes, the events of the previous night weighing heavily on my mind. Emily was still asleep, curled up on the couch, her breathing steady and deep. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about what she had told me and how her past seemed to be haunting her every step. It wasn't just the physical bruises, it was the way she looked at the world, like she was constantly waiting for something to go wrong. I understood that feeling. I had lived it for years. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do next. I had promised her safety, but I knew that promise was easier said than done. Emily wasn't just running from her father. She was running from the world, and I wasn't sure if I was capable of protecting her from everything that might come after. My mind kept racing, trying to figure out the best course of action. I had a few contacts in the area, but they weren't the kind of people who could offer protection in a situation like this. I didn't have the resources to take care of a child on the run, but I wasn't about to just let her slip through my fingers. I had made a promise to her, and I intended to keep it. The rain had let up by the time Emily woke up, rubbing her eyes and yawning. She looked up at me with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. What are we going to do now? She asked softly, her voice still tired. I took a deep breath, trying to hide the worry in my chest. We're going to figure it out, I said, keeping my tone calm. But first, we need to get you out of here, away from your dad and anyone else who might be looking for you. She nodded, but there was a sadness in her eyes that told me she wasn't sure if running was enough. I could see it in the way she held herself, like she was used to being alone, used to carrying the weight of the world on her small shoulders. We spent the next few hours packing up and getting ready to leave. I knew we couldn't stay here for long. There were too many risks. I couldn't let Emily's father find her, and I couldn't risk leading him straight to me. We had to be smart, careful. As we walked out of the motel and toward the bike, Emily stayed close to me, her small hand gripping the back of my jacket. I glanced down at her, seeing the trust in her eyes. She was depending on me, and that was something I wasn't used to. It felt strange, but in the best way possible. I hadn't let anyone rely on me in years. Not since my own daughter. The thought of my daughter hit me like a ton of bricks. I had promised her so many things, promises that I hadn't kept. She had trusted me, but I had failed her. And now, here I was, with another girl who had placed her trust in me. I couldn't fail her too. We'll be okay, I said, trying to reassure both of us. But even as I said the words, I knew that wasn't true. I wasn't sure how long we could keep running, or how much longer I could protect her from the ghosts of my own past. We rode for hours, the wind biting at our faces, the the road stretching out endlessly in front of us. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just kept riding, hoping that we could stay one step ahead of the danger that seemed to follow us. We stopped only to refuel and grab a quick bite to eat. Emily was quiet, her eyes watching everything around her with cautious interest. It was clear she wasn't used to this kind of freedom. Her life had been a constant battle, and now she was in uncharted territory. We finally reached a small town, far away from the city and any familiar faces. I pulled into a small diner, hoping to get some advice from the locals. As we walked inside, I could feel the eyes of the patrons on us. Emily stayed close, her hand tightly clutching mine. She had never been in a place like this, and I could tell she was nervous. The diner was warm, filled with the smells of fresh coffee and pancakes. It felt like the kind of place where people came to escape, if only for a little while. I sat down at a booth and ordered some coffee. Emily picked at her food, still too cautious to eat much. "What do you think?" I asked her after a few minutes of silence. "Are you ready for this?" Emily looked up at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know," she whispered. "I'm scared." I felt a pang in my chest. "I know," I said softly. "But we have each other, and we'll get through this together." As I sat there, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. I wasn't just protecting her from her father. I was protecting her from the world itself. And I wasn't. Sure, I was strong enough to keep her safe. But for now, all I could do was take it one step at a time. I couldn't think about the future or what might happen next. I just had to focus on keeping Emily safe, and maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to heal my own broken past along the way. As the days passed, the small town we had found refuge in began to feel more like a prison than a sanctuary. Every time I stepped outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. It wasn't just paranoia. There was a sense of unease in the air, a tension that seemed to hang over us like a storm cloud. Emily had noticed it too. She stayed close to me, her wide eyes scanning every face we passed, her small hand clinging to mine with a grip that was stronger than her size suggested. It wasn't just fear. It was the kind of wariness that only comes from a life spent in hiding, a life where trust is a luxury you can't afford. We had spent most of our time holed up in the diner, trying to lay low, but I knew that wouldn't last forever. Eventually, we would need to make a move. We couldn't stay in one place for too long, especially not with Emily's father possibly on our trail. I could feel the weight of the promise I had made to her pressing down on me. I had sworn to protect her, but the truth was, I wasn't sure how. I wasn't a hero. I was a biker, a man with a past full of mistakes and regrets. I had lived in the shadows for so long, and now, for the first time in years, I was trying to do the right thing. But I wasn't sure I was capable of it. I hadn't exactly been a role model, and taking care of a little girl wasn't something I knew how to do. But every time I looked at Emily, I saw something in her that reminded me of my own daughter. The same fear, the same uncertainty. I couldn't fail her the way I had failed my own child. I had to do better this time. It was early one morning when Emily and I were sitting in the corner of the diner, trying to blend in with the locals, when a man walked in. He was tall, with dark hair and a face that seemed to be carved from stone. He wasn't the kind of man who smiled much, and his eyes were hard, like he had seen things most people couldn't imagine. He caught my eye the moment he stepped through the door, and I could see the recognition in his gaze. He knew who I was. I could feel it. The weight of his stare felt like a challenge, like he was sizing me up, figuring out if I was someone he needed to be concerned about. I didn't know him, but I knew that look. It was the look of a man who had seen too much, a man who wasn't afraid to take what he wanted. I kept my cool, not wanting to draw attention to myself, but I knew this was not a good sign. The last thing I needed was trouble with someone from my past. Emily, sensing the shift in the air, looked up at me. Her eyes were filled with fear, the same fear that had been there since the first moment I found her. She was always watching, always waiting for the next thing to go wrong. "What's wrong?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Nothing," I said quickly, trying to calm her. "Just stay close." The man walked past our booth, his gaze lingering on me for a moment longer than was comfortable. He didn't say anything, just kept walking, but the unease I felt didn't fade. It only grew. I could feel his presence, like a shadow hovering just over my shoulder. I had to get out of here. As soon as the man sat down at the counter, I stood up, grabbing Emily's hand and pulling her with me. "We need to go," I muttered, my voice low but firm. Emily looked confused but didn't argue. She had learned to trust my instincts by now. We headed toward the door, but just as I reached for the handle, the man spoke. Leaving already? His voice was calm, too calm. I don't think we've been properly introduced. I froze, my hand still on the door. I didn't turn around. Didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me react, but I could feel the weight of his words. This wasn't a coincidence. He knew exactly who I was. I had known this day would come, the day my past caught up with me. But I hadn't expected it to be like this. Not with Emily in tow. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze. I don't want any trouble, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm just passing through. The man smirked, like he didn't believe me. Yeah, I figured you were, he said, his tone sharp now, like a blade being drawn. But you're not just passing through, are you? You're running. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. He was right. I was running, just like Emily. Running from the past. Running from the things I couldn't outrun. I had hoped I could outrun them, at least long enough to keep her safe. But I had known that was wishful thinking. The past always caught up with you, sooner or later. The man stood up, his presence suddenly filling the room. You don't belong here, Reaper, he said, his voice cold. And neither does she. He glanced at Emily, who was standing beside me, her small frame trembling slightly. You need to leave. Now. I didn't have to be told twice. I grabbed Emily's hand and made for the door, not looking back. As we stepped outside, I could feel the man's eyes still on us, like a predator watching its prey. The chill in the air hit me like a slap, but it wasn't just the cold that made me shiver. It was the feeling that we were being hunted. Emily was quiet as we walked down the street, her hand tightly clutching mine. I knew she was scared, but I didn't know how to comfort her. I didn't have the answers. All I had was a promise to keep, and I wasn't going to break it, no matter what. The sound of our footsteps echoed down the empty street as Emily and I walked in silence, both of us trying to process what had just happened. The man in the diner, his cold, threatening presence, still lingered in the back of my mind. I had hoped we could stay under the radar, that Emily's past would remain just that, her past. But now it was clear that running wasn't going to be enough. We couldn't hide forever. I had promised to keep her safe, but the weight of that promise was beginning to feel heavier with each step we took. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the street as I looked around, trying to figure out our next move. The small town we had settled into felt less like a safe haven and more like a trap. There were too many eyes, too many people who could recognize me, and too many potential threats. Emily's grip on my hand tightened, and I glanced down at her. Her face was pale, her eyes distant. She was still scared, and I couldn't blame her. We had been on the run for days, never staying in one place long enough to get comfortable. Every new place felt like a temporary refuge, and every new face seemed like a potential danger. Where are we going? Emily's voice broke through my thoughts, soft and uncertain. She was looking up at me, her expression filled with worry. I didn't have a good answer. I had no plan, no clear direction. All I knew was that we couldn't stay here any longer. We need to get out of town, I said, my voice low. But where will we go? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't have a clear answer for her, not yet. I don't know, I admitted, trying to keep the uncertainty out of my voice. But we'll figure it out. We have to. We walked for what felt like hours, our only company the quiet hum of the wind and the distant sound of cars driving by. Emily didn't say much, and I didn't push her to talk. I knew that, in time, she would open up when she was ready. For now, all we needed was each other and the promise that we weren't alone in this. As we reached the edge of town, I spotted a small motel tucked away behind a row of trees. It wasn't much, but it would do for the night. I could feel Emily's exhaustion, and I knew I couldn't push her any further. Let's stop here, I said, pulling her gently toward the motel. She didn't argue. She just followed me, her steps slower than usual. Inside, the motel clerk barely glanced up as we walked in, and I paid for the room without asking any questions. The room was small, but it had a bed and a bathroom, and that was all we needed for now. As soon as we were inside, I locked the door and pulled the curtains shut, shutting out the world. Emily immediately crawled into the bed, pulling the covers tightly around her. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window, my mind racing with thoughts of what had happened and what was to come. I couldn't help but feel like we were running out of time. I had no idea what would happen when Emily's father found her, or what kind of people were after her. All I knew was that I had to keep her safe, no matter the cost. Jake! Emily's voice called out to me softly. I turned to see her sitting up in the bed, her eyes wide and full of emotion. "What's going to happen to us?" she asked, her voice small and vulnerable. It broke my heart to hear her ask that. She had already been through so much, and now she was looking to me for answers I didn't have. "I don't know," I said honestly, my voice thick with emotion. "But I'll protect you, Emily. As long as I'm alive, you're not alone. I'll keep you safe." Her eyes searched mine, looking for the truth in my words. After a long moment, she nodded, and a small, fragile smile spread across her face. "Thank you," she whispered, and I could see the weight on her shoulders lift just a little. I walked over to the bed and sat next to her, reaching out to touch her hand. It felt like the right thing to do, like it was the only thing I could do. Emily curled up beside me, and I pulled the blanket over the two of us, making sure she was warm and comfortable. For the first time in days, I felt like we were safe, even if it was only for a moment. But I knew this wasn't the end. We couldn't stay here forever. We had to keep moving. The world outside was still out there, still full of threats, and I had no idea how long we could keep running. But for now, I would hold on to the promise I made to Emily. I would do everything in my power to protect her, to keep her safe from the past she was trying to escape. I just hoped that it would be enough. The next morning, the sun had barely risen when I woke up to find Emily sitting by the window, her small figure barely visible in the faint light. She was staring out at the world beyond, her expression distant, as if lost in thought. I hadn't realized how much this had all affected her, how deep the fear and uncertainty ran. She had been through more than any child should ever have to endure, and here she was, alone with a stranger, trusting me, despite everything. I stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. She flinched at first, but quickly relaxed when she recognized it was me. "Hey," I said softly, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "What's going on in that head of yours?" She didn't immediately respond. Instead, she just shook her head slightly, her gaze never leaving the view outside. It was clear she wasn't ready to talk about it, but I could feel the weight of the silence between us. "I know you're scared," I continued, lowering myself to sit beside her. "I'm scared too, but we're in this together, okay? We'll figure it out, one step at a time." Emily finally turned to look at me, her eyes full of sorrow and uncertainty. "I just want to go home," she whispered, her voice breaking as she spoke. My heart sank as I heard the words. She had lost so much, her family, her sense of security, and now she was here with me, a man she barely knew, trying to rebuild some semblance of safety. "I know, kid," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "I know you do. But for now, this is our home. This is where we start over." The words felt hollow in my mouth, but they were all I had to offer her. I couldn't promise her that everything would be okay, not when I wasn't sure of that myself. All I could do was be there for her, do the best I could to protect her. I stood up and walked over to the small kitchenette in the corner of the room, trying to break the silence. "How about some breakfast?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. "We could use a good meal before we figure out what's next." She nodded, though she didn't seem particularly hungry. She was still holding on to that distant look, the kind of look that made it clear she wasn't fully present in the moment. I made some coffee and a quick breakfast, and as I placed a plate in front of her, I tried again to reach her. "Emily, you're not alone in this. We'll get through it, okay? One step at a time." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with confusion and sorrow, and I could see that she didn't fully believe me. How could she? She had been let down too many times. But I had to believe that I could be the one to change that. After breakfast, we packed up our things and checked out of the motel, knowing that we couldn't stay there much longer. We had to keep moving, keep changing locations to stay one step ahead of whatever might be tracking us. I didn't know how long we had before things caught up with us, but I wasn't willing to find out the hard way. As we walked to the bike, I could feel the weight of Emily's gaze on me. She was still scared, but there was a glimmer of something else in her eyes. Trust. Maybe it was small, maybe it was fragile, but it was there. I climbed onto the bike and helped her onto the back. She hesitated for a moment, looking around at the quiet town one last time before gripping my jacket tightly. I started the engine, and we pulled away, leaving behind the small motel and the town that had been both a refuge and a prison. The wind whipped through our hair as we rode, the familiar hum of the engine beneath us offering a sense of security. For a brief moment, it felt like everything was going to be okay. But I knew that was a lie. Nothing was going to be okay until we figured out what the next step was. We drove for hours, the road stretching out before us like an endless ribbon of uncertainty. I didn't have a destination in mind, just another town, just another place to stay for the night. But that wasn't the answer either. I couldn't keep running. Eventually, I would have to face the truth of what was happening. And so would Emily. As we rode, I felt the weight of my promise to her. I had sworn to keep her safe, and that promise was the only thing that kept me going. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. We needed help. We needed a plan. I just didn't know where to start. The sun was beginning to set when we pulled into a small town on the outskirts of nowhere. It wasn't much, just a handful of shops, a diner, and a gas station. I pulled into the parking lot of a small motel, hoping to find a place to rest for the night. We couldn't stay here long, but for now, it would do. As we checked in and made our way to the room, I could feel Emily's eyes on me, filled with unspoken questions. "What now?" she asked quietly, her voice uncertain. I didn't have the answer. I didn't know what came next. But I knew one thing for sure, we weren't giving up. We were going to get through this, no matter what it took. We stayed at the small motel for the night, the dim light from the streetlights filtering through the blinds. I kept my eyes on the door, listening for any sign of movement outside. Every creak of the building, every shadow seemed to carry a threat. I tried to keep calm for Emily's sake, but the uncertainty of it all was starting to wear on me. She had fallen asleep quickly, exhausted from everything we'd been through. I, on the other hand, couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. The man in the diner had given me a clear warning, and I knew we couldn't stay in one place much longer. The weight of my past was catching up with me, and I didn't know how to outrun it. Emily stirred in the bed, and I turned my attention to her. She was curled up tightly, her small face peaceful in sleep, but there was an air of tension even in her rest. I wondered what she was dreaming about. It had been hard for me to sleep, and even harder to shut my mind off. I kept thinking about the people I had wronged, the things I had done that I couldn't take back. I had lived my life trying to bury those regrets, but now, with Emily relying on me, it felt like I couldn't escape them. I walked over to the window and peeked through the blinds, scanning the parking lot. The rain from earlier had stopped, and the streets were eerily quiet. There was no sign of anyone suspicious, but I knew that didn't mean we were safe. I had learned long ago not to trust appearances. As I stood there, I couldn't help but think about the journey ahead. Where would we go? How would we keep moving forward when I didn't even know where to begin? The past few days had been a blur of adrenaline, but now that things had calmed down a bit, the reality was starting to settle in. I had promised Emily that I would protect her, but what did that even mean? How could I, a man with my own dark past, provide any sense of security? The uncertainty gnawed at me, but I couldn't let it show. I couldn't let Emily see how scared I was. I had to be strong for her, even if I didn't feel strong. I took a deep breath and walked back to the bed. Emily was still asleep, but I knew that when she woke up, we would have to make a decision. We couldn't stay here forever. We had to keep moving, but the question was where. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I couldn't keep running on instinct forever. I needed a plan. The following morning, the sun rose slowly over the horizon, and I felt the weight of the day ahead settle over me. Emily woke up and looked around the room, confusion clouding her features for a brief moment. It seemed like she wasn't sure where she was, and I didn't blame her. She had been through so much. I forced a smile and sat down beside her. "Morning, kid," I said softly. "Ready to get moving?" She nodded quietly, and I could tell she was still processing everything. She had been strong, stronger than I had expected, but I knew this was starting to take its toll on her. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small. I didn't have a good answer. I was still figuring that part out. "We'll figure it out," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "But first, we need to get out of here. Stay low, keep moving. It's the only way. We'll stay ahead." I helped her gather our things, and as we packed up, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It was probably just my paranoia kicking in, but after everything that had happened, I couldn't afford to ignore that nagging sense of danger. As we left the motel and made our way back to the bike, I looked around one last time, scanning the area for anything unusual. I didn't see anything, but that didn't mean much. The world was full of surprises, most of them bad. "Let's go," I said, my voice low. I started the bike, and Emily climbed on behind me. The sound of the engine filled the air, and for a moment, it almost felt normal, like everything would be okay. But I knew that wasn't true. I had no idea what we were heading into, no idea what awaited us. But I knew one thing for sure. I would do whatever it took to keep Emily safe. As we rode, the wind hitting my face and the world flying by, I tried to focus on the road ahead. But I couldn't stop thinking about the man in the diner, about the warning he had given me. It was clear that things were getting more dangerous and fast. I wasn't sure how long we could keep running, but I knew we had to keep moving, no matter what. We rode for hours, the open road stretching out in front of us, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could outrun the past. But as the miles rolled on, I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut, the feeling that everything was about to change. And when it did, I had no idea what side of it I would end up on. The ride had been long, and the road seemed to stretch on endlessly. We had made our way out of the small town, riding into the unknown. The wind rushed past us, and for a while, the sound of the engine was the only thing that filled the silence. I could feel Emily holding on behind me, her small hands gripping me tightly as if she was afraid to let go. I didn't blame her. She had already been through too much for someone so young. Every bump in the road, every turn we made, seemed to deepen the weight that hung over us. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to focus on the ride, but the anxiety of the unknown gnawed at me. I had promised her safety, but how could I keep that promise when I didn't even know where we were headed? The bike hummed beneath us, steady and constant, but my mind was racing. What would we do when we ran out of places to hide? How long could we keep running? The thought weighed on me, but I couldn't afford to show it. I had to stay strong for Emily. I had to believe that I could protect her. We stopped at a small gas station on the outskirts of a town that seemed to have little more than a few rundown buildings and an abandoned diner. It was as good a place as any to take a break. I filled the bike and grabbed a few snacks from the small convenience store. Emily stayed close, her eyes scanning the area warily. I could tell she didn't trust this place, didn't trust anyone or anything anymore. I understood that. After everything she had been through, I didn't expect her to trust anyone easily. But we were in this together now, and I would do whatever it took to keep her safe. As we sat on the curb outside the gas station, I couldn't help but think back on everything that had happened. We were running from her father, yes, but I also knew that we were running from more than that. I was running from my own past, my own mistakes. I had done things I wasn't proud of, things that had cost me everything. And now, here I was, trying to protect a little girl who deserved so much more than this. The weight of my own failures pressed down on me, but I couldn't afford to dwell on them. Not now. Not when Emily needed me. "Jake." Emily's voice broke through my thoughts, soft but clear. I turned to look at her. "What's next?" she asked, her eyes filled with that familiar uncertainty. It broke my heart to see her like this. She had been through so much already, and yet, here she was, asking me what we were going to do next. "We keep moving," I said, my voice firm, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "We can't stay here. We need to find a place where no one knows us, where no one can hurt us." She nodded quietly, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. I wasn't sure if she believed me, but I had to believe it for both of us. The world wasn't kind, but that didn't mean we couldn't find some kind of peace. We finished our break and got back on the bike, continuing our journey without a clear destination. We rode through the quiet countryside, the sun starting to dip low in the sky. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. I glanced over at Emily. She was staring ahead, her face a mix of fear and resolve. She was trying to hold it together, but I could see the cracks starting to show. I knew that she was struggling, that she was scared. I could see it in the way she held herself, in the way she avoided making eye contact. I knew that she had her own demons to fight, her own battles that she wasn't ready to face. "We'll be okay," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "I won't let anything happen to you." Emily didn't respond, but I could feel her nod against my back. I wasn't sure if she believed me, but I had to believe it for both of us. The night was coming fast, and we needed to find a place to stay. I pulled off the main road and into a small town that looked like it had seen better days. It was quiet, the streets empty, but there was a motel at the end of the block. It wasn't much, but it would do for the night. I parked the bike and helped Emily off, keeping an eye on the surroundings. We didn't know who could be watching, who might be following us. We couldn't afford to take any chances. Inside the motel, the air was thick with the smell of old carpet and stale coffee. The clerk barely looked up as we checked in, and I paid in cash, not wanting to leave any trace of us behind. The room was small, but clean enough. A single bed, a small bathroom, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. Emily sat down on the bed, her eyes distant. She was still holding on to her fear, still carrying the weight of everything she had been through. I sat beside her, not knowing what to say. "Jake," she said softly, breaking the silence. "Do you think we'll ever be safe?" I felt a lump form in my throat as I looked at her. The innocence in her eyes, the trust she had placed in me, it was more than I deserved. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we are." It wasn't the answer she wanted, and it wasn't the answer I wanted either. But it was the truth. For now, that was all I had to offer. Emily leaned against me, her small frame trembling slightly. I wrapped my arm around her, holding her close, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. It was just the two of us, trying to find our way through the darkness. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way out. The morning came quickly, and the air outside was thick with the humidity of an impending storm. Emily was still asleep when I woke up, her body curled into a tight ball on the small motel bed. The gentle rise and fall of her chest was the only sign of life in the otherwise quiet room. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The night had been restless for both of us, but I knew the real challenge lay ahead. We couldn't keep running forever. We had to find a way to stop looking over our shoulders. I stood up, stretching my stiff muscles, and moved to the small window. The sky outside was a dull gray, the clouds thick with rain. I couldn't help but feel like the weather mirrored the storm that was brewing inside me. It wasn't long before Emily stirred, waking up with a soft groan. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she looked disoriented, like she didn't remember where she was. When her eyes met mine, I could see the vulnerability in them. It wasn't just the fear of her father anymore. She was scared of the world, of the uncertainty, of everything that seemed to be spiraling out of control. "Morning," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You sleep okay?" She nodded slowly, but the uncertainty was still there, buried beneath her usual quiet strength. "Yeah," she whispered, though I knew it wasn't true. "I guess." I walked over to the small kitchenette and started making some coffee, trying to settle my thoughts. The smell of the brewing coffee filled the small room, but it didn't bring the comfort it usually did. Emily sat up, rubbing her eyes, and watched me silently. It wasn't lost on me that she had learned to keep her distance, to be careful with her words. She didn't trust easily. I didn't blame her. "I think we need to move again," I said, my voice low, not wanting to sound too ominous. "I've been thinking about it, and we can't stay here for long. We need to keep going." Emily looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "Where are we going?" she asked quietly. I hesitated. I didn't have a good answer. "I don't know yet," I admitted, trying not to let the frustration slip into my tone. "But we'll figure it out. We can't just keep running around in circles." Emily didn't say anything, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of everything she had been through. She was tired of running, of hiding, of living in fear. I couldn't blame her. I was tired too. "Do you think we'll ever be safe?" she asked, her voice small, filled with that same uncertainty I had heard in her voice the day I first met her. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her that everything would be okay. But the truth was, I didn't know. "I don't know," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you're safe. As long as I'm here, I won't let anything happen to you." She didn't respond, but I could tell by the way she held herself that my words, though well-intended, didn't reach her the way I wanted them to. She had heard promises before, and they had been broken. She had learned to survive on her own, and I couldn't blame her for that either. We finished our breakfast in silence, and as I packed our things, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. It was like the calm before the storm, and I knew the moment we stepped outside, things were going to get harder. We couldn't keep hiding forever. We couldn't keep running from our pasts. And the longer we stayed in one place, the more likely it was that someone would catch up to us. As we stepped out of the motel room, the air felt thick with the weight of the decision I had to make. I could feel Emily beside me, her presence grounding me, even as I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. We didn't have much time. I couldn't keep protecting her by running. But where could we go? What was the right move? As I looked down at Emily, I knew that I couldn't afford to fail her. I had to find a way to make this right, to give her a chance at something better. And I couldn't do that by staying in hiding. Let's go, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. We'll figure it out. Together. Emily didn't respond, but I could feel her trust in the way she moved beside me, the way she followed my lead without question. I didn't know where we were going, but I knew we had to go somewhere. The road stretched out before us, full of uncertainty, full of possibility. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe we could find a way to make it out of this mess. Maybe we could stop running and start living. The road ahead wasn't clear, but I wasn't going to stop moving until we found our way. In a long journey that seemed to stretch on forever, Emily sat quietly on the back of the bike, her hands gripping me tightly, her body pressed against mine as we navigated through the winding roads. I could feel her warmth, her presence grounding me, even as the uncertainty of everything continued to weigh on us. I had promised to protect her, to keep her safe, but the road ahead felt more uncertain than ever. We needed to find a way to stop running. We couldn't keep this up forever. The further we traveled, the more I realized that this wasn't just about keeping Emily safe. It was about redemption, about doing right by her, and about trying to put my past behind me. But the further we went, the more the weight of my past seemed to chase us. I glanced back at Emily, who was staring off into the distance. I knew she was still processing everything. It was hard for a kid to understand why her world had been turned upside down, why she was on the run with a man she barely knew. But she was holding on, staying strong, just like I was. We needed to find some kind of peace, a place where we could breathe and not feel like the world was always on our heels. But I wasn't sure where that place was. The night was falling, and the rain had started again, light at first, but then heavier, pelting against the road as we kept going. I pulled into a small gas station on the outskirts of another town, hoping to take a moment to regroup, to figure out what came next. Emily didn't say anything as I filled the bike with gas, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. We were both worn thin by the constant movement, the constant fear. It wasn't the life either of us had planned. I walked over to Emily, who was standing off to the side, her eyes scanning the parking lot, looking for any sign of danger. "Hey," I said gently, trying to keep my voice calm. "We need to figure out what to do next. You okay?" She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she wasn't going to respond, but then she nodded. "I'm just tired," she said quietly. "I know," I replied, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We all are." I didn't know how to make it better, how to fix everything that was broken, but I knew I had to keep trying. For her, I had to keep moving forward, keep believing that we could find a way out of this. We spent the next few minutes deciding on our next move. I didn't have a clear plan. Hell, I barely had a plan at all, but I knew we needed to keep moving. We couldn't stay in one place for too long. "Let's head to the next town," I said after a moment. "We'll find a place to stay for the night, and tomorrow, we figure out what comes next." Emily nodded, though she didn't seem fully convinced. I could tell she was just going along with it, trying to stay hopeful, trying to stay strong. "Okay," she said softly, her voice carrying a hint of doubt. We got back on the bike and headed out, the rain now coming down in sheets, the road slick and dangerous. The lights of the next town were just a blur through the windshield, but I could feel Emily clinging to me, her small body shaking slightly from the cold. It didn't take long for us to find a small motel on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it would do for the night. I paid for the room in cash, and we made our way inside. The air was thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and old carpet, but it didn't matter. It was a roof over our heads, and that was all we needed for now. Emily sat down on the bed, her exhaustion catching up with her. I knew she was scared, but she didn't show it. She was always so composed, always so quiet, like she had learned to hold it all inside. "You okay?" I asked, sitting down beside her. She nodded, though I could see the tears she was trying to hide. "I'm fine," she whispered, her voice small. "I'm just tired." I didn't push her to say more. I knew she would open up when she was ready. For now, all I could do was be there for her, try to make her feel safe in a world that was anything but. The night stretched on, the rain still falling steadily outside. I kept thinking about what lay ahead, about the future we were trying to build. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew I couldn't stop fighting for her. I couldn't stop trying to make things right. Emily drifted off to sleep a little while later, her small body curled up on the bed, her breathing slow and steady. I watched her for a while, the quiet of the room wrapping around us like a cocoon. I couldn't promise her that everything would be okay, but I could promise that I would never stop trying to protect her. As I lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, I realized something. We couldn't outrun the past, but maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to live in spite of it. I wasn't sure how, but I had to believe it. I had to believe that there was a future for us, that we could find a way to escape the shadows and find some peace. Tomorrow, we would take the next step. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face whatever came next. The morning came too quickly, and as I sat up in the small motel room, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get more complicated. The rain had stopped, but the sky still held a heavy grayness, like a storm was just waiting to break again. Emily was still asleep on the bed, curled up tightly in the blankets, her breathing slow and steady. I couldn't help but watch her for a moment, taking in the way her small body relaxed in sleep. She looked so peaceful, like the world hadn't just shattered around her. But I knew better. The world had already changed, and no amount of sleep would fix that. I stood up and quietly walked to the window, peeking through the blinds. The parking lot outside was empty, the streets still wet from the rain. It felt like the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for something. I didn't know what that something was, but I had a sinking feeling in my gut that it was coming soon. I turned back to look at Emily, who was now shifting in her sleep. She murmured softly, her eyes fluttering open. It wasn't long before she sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Morning," I said softly, trying to keep my voice casual. She looked up at me, her expression still distant, like she hadn't fully woken up. "Morning," she replied, her voice quiet and unsure. I could see it in her eyes. She was still processing everything, still carrying the weight of all the uncertainty. She didn't know what was next, and honestly, neither did I. I walked over to the bed and sat down next to her. "You ready to go?" I asked gently, though I already knew what the answer would be. Emily didn't respond right away. She just looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the edge of the blanket. I could tell she was lost in her own thoughts, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. "I don't want to keep running," she finally said, her voice small and fragile. The words hit me harder than I expected. I had known that Emily was tired of running, tired of hiding, but hearing her say it aloud made it real. "I know," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But we don't have a choice." "Not yet." She nodded slowly, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. Neither was I. But what choice did we have? We couldn't stay here. Not with the constant fear that someone was looking for us. "We'll figure it out," I added, trying to reassure both of us. "We just need to keep moving." After a few moments of silence, Emily looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "Do you think we'll be okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question stung. I wanted to lie to her, to tell her that everything would be fine, that we would be safe, but I couldn't bring myself to say those words. Not when I didn't know the answer myself. "I don't know," I admitted honestly, "but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we're okay. We'll take it one step at a time." She didn't say anything more, but the way she looked at me, the way she held my gaze, told me that she was holding on to that hope. We got dressed and packed up our things, the sound of our movements filling the silence in the room. The weight of the situation still hung over us, but there was something else too. A sense of determination, a shared understanding that we had to keep going. We couldn't stop now, not when we were so close to finding something better. As we walked out of the motel and toward the bike, the air felt cooler than it had the day before. The rain had passed, but the clouds still lingered, as though the sky was watching us, waiting for something. I could feel Emily's hand gripping mine tightly, her fingers cold against my skin. I squeezed her hand gently, trying to offer her some comfort. "It's going to be okay," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. She looked up at me, her face full of uncertainty, but she nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice barely audible. I could see that she was trying to believe me, trying to trust me, but I could also see the doubt in her eyes. I didn't blame her. We had been through too much already. As we rode out of the town and onto the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, trying to focus on the ride, but the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. It was like we were being watched. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but saw nothing. It was just the road, stretching out endlessly behind us. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. I tried to push the thought aside, telling myself it was just paranoia. But the longer we rode, the more I realized I couldn't ignore it. We had been on the road for hours when I saw the car in the distance. It was a dark sedan, just barely visible in the rearview mirror, but something about it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't tell for sure, but I had a bad feeling about it. The car wasn't moving like the others we had passed. It was staying a little too close, a little too steady. My heart started to race. "Emily," I said quietly, my voice low. "I think we're being followed." Emily didn't respond, but I could feel her body tense against mine. She had heard it in my voice. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't have a good answer. For her. "We keep going," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Stay calm. We'll figure this out." But deep down, I knew we were running out of time. And this time, there was no guarantee we would make it out unscathed. The car was still behind us, just out of the corner of my eye, staying with us on the road like an unwanted shadow. I didn't know who was in it, but I could feel the weight of their presence like a pressure in my chest. I glanced back again, and this time I could make out the details more clearly: dark windows, sleek body, and a steady pace. It wasn't just following us, it was keeping track of our movements, mimicking them in the same way a predator does before it pounces. I could hear the engine of the bike grow louder, the wind whipping against us, but all I could focus on was that car. "Jake, what's happening?" Emily's voice was soft, but filled with concern. I could feel her tightening her grip around my waist, her body pressed up against me. "Stay calm, Emily," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel the tension creeping into my own words. "It's probably just someone passing by." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. This was no coincidence. I could feel my heart rate speeding up. I had been on the run for a long time, but never had I felt like we were so close to being caught. I kept my eyes focused on the road ahead, but my mind was already racing through every possibility. There were too many unknowns. Who was in the car? Why were they following us? And what did they want? I couldn't make sense of any of it, but I had learned to trust my instincts, and my instincts were telling me that this wasn't just a simple case of bad luck. We were being hunted. I pushed the throttle harder, trying to put more distance between us and the car. The road curved up ahead, and I leaned into the turn. Emily's small form pressed against me as the bike shifted, and we sped up. I knew the car would follow, but I needed to buy us some time. The rain started again, coming down in sheets. It was the kind of rain that blurred the world around you, turning everything into a watery smear. It helped, but it also made things more dangerous. The road was slick, and the visibility was poor. I had to focus on the ride, keeping us steady, keeping us safe. But no matter how fast I went, the car was still there. It was like a shadow that wouldn't leave us alone. "Jake, it's getting closer," Emily said, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. I didn't want to answer her, didn't want to admit that I was scared too. But I could hear the car now, the low growl of its engine as it picked up speed, closing the gap between us. I could almost feel it right behind us, like something was breathing down my neck. "Hold on tight," I said, my grip on the handlebars tightening. We couldn't outrun them forever. I knew that, but I wasn't ready to face whatever it was they had in mind for us. I pushed the bike harder, leaning into each curve, pushing against the wind, against the fear that was starting to rise in my chest. The road ahead was a blur, the lights of the car flashing in my rearview mirror. It was like we were in a race against time, and I wasn't sure how long we could keep this up. I glanced back once more, and for the first time, I saw the car's headlights up close, too close. It was gaining on us. "Emily," I said, my voice sharp now, filled with the urgency of the situation. "Get ready. We need to lose them. We can't keep going like this." She nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She was just a kid, and she had been through so much already. The last thing I wanted was to drag her into a fight, but there was no choice. We were out of options. I scanned the road ahead, looking for a place to turn, to hide, anything to throw the car off our trail. And then I saw it, a narrow dirt road off to the right, barely visible through the rain and the mist. Without thinking, I swerved the bike toward it, narrowly missing a guardrail as we veered off the main road. The car followed us, just as I knew it would, but the dirt road was uneven, bumpy, and full of sharp turns. I could hear the car trying to keep up, but I wasn't sure how long it would last. We needed to get off the main road, away from the eyes that might be watching, away from whoever was chasing us. We kept pushing through, the bike bouncing over the rough ground, the sound of the engine filling the air. The rain was coming down harder now, and the road was slick with mud, making every turn more dangerous. But I kept going, focusing on the road ahead. We needed to make it out of this, no matter what it took. The car was still behind us, but it wasn't gaining anymore. I could hear it sputtering, struggling to keep up, the sound of its engine faltering as it hit a particularly rough patch of road. It was falling behind, but we weren't out of danger yet. We had to get deeper into the woods, get far enough away so that whoever was chasing us couldn't find us again. The road twisted and turned, the bike leaning sharply as I tried to keep control, trying to get us as far away as possible. Emily's grip tightened around me, her body pressed against mine as the bumps in the road threw us around. "We're okay," I said, trying to reassure her. But even I wasn't sure of that anymore. We kept going, my mind focused on the ride, on the road, on anything but the car behind us. But as the miles passed, I realized that we had lost them. The car was gone. We had made it through. But even as the danger seemed to pass, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just barely escaped. And I wasn't sure how long we could keep outrunning the past. But for now, we were safe. And that was enough.